A growl tore across the yard, low and mean. A man jerked his hand back fast. Blood ran down 2 fingers where teeth had caught him. He swore, stumbled off the porch, and didn't look back. The other workers scattered. Nobody wanted to be next. The animal stood stiff in the dirt, hackles up, ears pinned flat against the Ashford skull. A ridge of old wounds ran down one shoulder. His teeth were still bared. His eyes said one thing: come closer and lose a hand. They called him Duke. A German shepherd who had bitten 2 grown men and trusted no one since the day his master was buried. For 3 years, not a single soul had touched him. Then a 2-year-old boy walked straight toward those bared teeth. And what that old dog did next stopped every single heart in the yard. Stay with me on this one. The Ashford estate sat outside Savannah, a big white house with columns wrapped in oak trees and heat. In the summer of 1922, the air there didn't move. It just hung on you, thick and wet, all day long. And in that heat, Duke ruled the grounds like a soldier who'd never been told the war was over. He had come to the estate as a pup back when the old master was alive. Colonel Edward Ashford, a tall man, quiet, walked with a cane and a limp from a war nobody talked about anymore. The colonel raised that dog himself, fed him by hand. Wherever the colonel went, the dog went 2 steps behind, ears up, watching the world for anything that might do the old man harm. Then one winter the colonel's heart gave out in the night, and Duke was the one who found him. They said the dog wouldn't leave the room, wouldn't let the doctor in, wouldn't let the undertaker near. It took 3 men and a length of rope to drag him out to the yard so they could carry the colonel's body down the stairs. And Duke never forgave a single one of them for it. Not the doctor, not the family, not anybody who breathed. After the funeral, the dog changed. He staked out a patch of ground near the servants' quarters under a wide old oak, and he treated that patch like it was his to defend to the death. Come near it and he'd rise up, slow and stiff, and show you those teeth. 2 groundskeepers learned the hard way. One reached down to shoo him off a flower bed, got his hand opened up for it. The second tried to loop a rope over the dog's neck to move him. Duke put him on his back in the dirt with 4 stitches to show for it. After that, the estate had a rule spoken plain to every new hire on their first day. Don't touch the dog, don't talk to the dog, don't even look him in the eye. You leave Duke be and Duke leaves you be. That was the deal. Now here's the thing. A rule like that only holds until somebody new comes along who doesn't understand it yet. Her name was Clara Bexley. She came to the Ashford house that June to work as a housemaid. 23 years old, a widow already, with a soft voice and hands that never stopped moving. Her husband had died the year before, a mill accident, and it left her with nothing but a trunk of clothes and a little boy. So she took the first honest work she could find, and the Ashford estate was hiring. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Prout, walked her through the grounds the first morning. And when they crossed the back lawn, Mrs. Prout stopped, and her voice dropped low. "You see that dog under the tree?" Clara looked. There he was, a big shepherd lying in the shade, thin and scarred, watching them with cold amber eyes that didn't blink. "That's Duke," Mrs. Prout said. "He's bitten 2 men on this property. He belongs to no one now and he wants it that way. You keep your distance. You keep the child away from him. That animal is not right in the head, and one day somebody's going to have to do something about him. Until then, you stay clear." The child, that was the other thing about Clara. She had nowhere to leave her boy while she worked, so she'd struck a bargain to keep him with her on the grounds. His name was Thomas, 2 years old, fat little legs, a mop of pale curls, and not 1 ounce of fear in his whole body. He was at that age where the whole world was a wonder and none of it could hurt him. He'd toddle after a chicken. He'd reach for a bee. He'd walk right off the edge of a porch step if you weren't watching, because he simply didn't know yet that the ground could come up and bite you. And Clara watched him. Believe me, she watched him like a hawk, because she had already lost a husband, and that boy was every single thing she had left in this world. There was a rope of fear tied around her heart, and the other end of it was tied around that little boy, and it went tight every time he left her sight. So when Mrs. Prout said keep the child away from the dog, Clara nodded hard and meant it. But the estate was big. The lawns rolled on. And a 2-year-old is quick and quiet, and always looking for the one gap in the fence you forgot to close. Duke watched the new woman and her boy from under his tree, and he decided the same thing he decided about everyone. Stay away. He didn't bark. He didn't rise. He just laid his head back down on his paws and kept one eye open, the way a soldier sleeps when the war is still on inside his head. Because that was the truth of it. That dog wasn't mean. Not really. He was grieving. He'd built a wall around himself so high and so hard that nothing could get over it. And a wall like that keeps the pain out, sure, but it keeps everything else out too. The warmth, the kindness, the touch of a hand that only wants to be gentle. For 3 years, Duke had kept that wall standing. He had no idea it was about to come down. The afternoon it happened was one of those savannah days where the heat sits on your chest like a wet blanket. Not a breath of wind. The cicadas screaming in the trees. Duke lay under his oak, stretched out in the dirt, and he was doing a thing he'd learned to do. He was pretending to sleep. See, if the staff thought he was awake, they'd fuss. But if he lay dead still, ears flat, eyes shut to slits, they'd decide he was dozing and leave him in peace. It was the only peace he got, so he faked it so the world would pass him by and let an old dog rest. That afternoon, Clara was hanging wash on the line by the quarters, her back to the yard, clothespins in her mouth. And Thomas was playing at her feet with a little wooden spinning top the old cook had carved for him. He'd set it going, watch it wobble and fall, laugh, and set it going again. Then the top rolled away across the grass. And Thomas, being 2, went after it. Clara had a sheet half pinned. She reached up to fix the corner, and in the 3 seconds her eyes were on that line, her boy was gone. He'd followed the top clear across the lawn, right up to the oak tree, right up to the dog. When Clara turned and saw the empty grass, her whole body went cold. The clothespins fell from her mouth. Her eyes swept the yard, fast, panicked. And then she saw him, little Thomas, sitting down in the dirt. Not 2 feet from Duke's bared and scarred and terrible head. Everything in her went to ice. A gardener near the shed saw it too and froze with his rake in the air. Mrs. Prout, coming out with a tray, stopped dead on the step. In the space of a breath, 6 people were standing stone still, staring at the same awful thing, a baby, and the dog that had bitten 2 grown men. Clara opened her mouth to scream his name, and then she shut it, because some deep animal part of her brain knew the truth. If she screamed, if she ran, the dog would startle, and a startled dog snaps. She'd seen what those jaws did to a grown man's hand. She thought of what they'd do to her boy's face, and she nearly fainted where she stood. So she didn't scream. She started walking, slow, shaking, every step a lifetime, and Thomas, God love him, had no idea any of this was happening. He'd found the top. It had rolled up against the dog's front leg. And now the boy was looking at the dog, and the dog was looking at the boy, nose to nose, close enough to feel each other breathe. Duke had stopped pretending to sleep. His eyes were open now, wide open, fixed on the small pink hand reaching toward him. The gardener whispered, "Oh no." Clara was still 10 feet away and closing, one careful step at a time, tears running down her face, her hands out in front of her like she could catch what was coming. And then the boy did the thing that stopped every heart in that yard. He reached out and patted the dog on the ribs. 2 soft little pats, and he leaned in close, and in that small, mushed-up baby voice he said, "You look lonely." That was all, "You look lonely." Duke went rigid. Every muscle in that scarred old body locked up tight. His lip twitched. Somewhere down in his chest a sound started building, that low rumble the whole estate had learned to fear. Clara heard it and her heart stopped. She was 6 feet away now, too far to do a single thing but watch. The rumble climbed. The boy kept padding, 2 feet of dead air between a baby's soft cheek and a mouth full of teeth. And then, the rumble died. It just stopped, cut off in the dog's throat like a candle pinched out. Duke's lip came back down over his teeth. His ears, pinned flat for 3 long years, lifted, just a little, just enough. And the old dog leaned in, slow, trembling. And he pressed the top of his big scarred head against the boy's chest, so gentle, so careful, like the boy was made of something that might break. Then he let out a long, shaking breath, and he lay back down in the dirt, and he put his heavy head right in the little boy's lap. Nobody in that yard moved. Nobody breathed. Clara stood frozen with both hands over her mouth, tears pouring down, watching her son stroke the ears of a dog that had never once in 3 years let a living soul touch him. Thomas giggled. He patted the dog's head like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Good doggy," he said. And Duke, for the first time since they dragged him out of a dead man's room with a rope around his neck, closed his eyes and rested. Truly rested. The wall was down, and an old broken heart, hidden away so long behind those teeth, cracked wide open in the afternoon heat. For a long moment the whole yard just stared. Then Mrs. Prout let out a breath she'd been holding so long her hand shook. And Clara, hardly able to believe her own eyes, crept the last few steps and knelt in the grass beside them, and she gathered her boy up into her arms while the dog watched her do it, calm as could be. Duke didn't growl. He didn't rise. He just thumped his tail once in the dirt. That evening the whole estate was talking about it. Some folks said it was a miracle. Some said it was a fluke. But that night when Clara carried Thomas up the servants' stairs to bed, Duke followed them clear to the porch and lay down at the bottom step, and he stayed there all night long, guarding the door the boy had gone through. Now if you're already reaching for a tissue, hang on, because the story doesn't end with a sweet dog and a sweet boy. If you're enjoying this so far, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is the part that'll really get you. This is where it turns. 3 weeks went by, and they were the best 3 weeks that old dog had known in years. Every morning, Thomas would toddle out to the oak tree, and Duke would already be waiting, tail going, ears up. The boy would flop down against the dog's side, and the two of them would nap in the shade together while Clara worked the wash line close by. Duke let the boy tug his ears, let him climb over his back, let him fall asleep with a fist full of dog fur. And that scarred, mean, dangerous animal turned out to be the gentlest thing on 4 legs, so long as the baby was near. He changed toward Clara too. He let her set his food down without backing away. He let her scratch under his chin. The dog had a family again, and the wall he'd built to keep the whole world out had a door in it now, just big enough for the two of them to walk through. Then one afternoon, a black motor car came up the long drive, and everything changed. Out of it stepped a man in a fine gray suit, Roland Ashford, the colonel's nephew, and as it turned out, the one who'd inherited the whole estate. He hadn't set foot on the property in years. He'd been in the city, tending to the money side of things, and now he'd finally come to see what was his. He was not a warm man. You could see it in the way he walked the grounds with a little leather ledger under his arm, tallying up the house, the land, the horses, the staff, like items on a butcher's slate. He nodded at nothing. He smiled at no one. And then he came around the back lawn and he saw the dog. Duke was lying under the oak with Thomas curled against his belly, both of them half asleep in the heat. Roland Ashford stopped. He looked at the dog. Then he looked at his ledger. Then he called for Mrs. Prout. "That animal," he said, pointing with his pen. "Whose is it?" "That's Duke, sir. He was the colonel's." "The colonel's been dead 3 years." Roland flipped a page. "I had a letter from the estate lawyer. 2 injury claims against this property. Do you know what one lawsuit would cost me?" He snapped the ledger shut. That dog is a liability walking around on 4 legs. I want it gone." Mrs. Prout's face went pale. "Sir, he's changed. He's gentle now with the boy. He wouldn't hurt a fly," Roland cut in. "Right up until the day he takes a child's face off and I lose this whole estate to the courts. No. I've made my decision." He looked at the sleeping dog and his voice went flat and cold as a stone. "I'll have the county man out here Saturday with a rifle. We'll put the animal down and be done with it. It's the responsible thing." And just like that, everything changed. See, up to now, this had been a sweet story about a mean dog going soft, pride melting into love. But now it wasn't about that at all. Now it was about whether that old dog would even be alive come Sunday morning. A stranger with a ledger and a rifle had walked onto the grounds, and the story stopped being about a broken heart and started being about a life. Clara heard it all from the wash line. The clothespins fell from her hands. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch step with Duke's head in her lap and the boy asleep inside, and she tried to think of what to do. She had no money. She had no standing. She was a housemaid, a widow, a nobody, and the man who'd given the order owned every board and nail for a mile in each direction. The next morning she found the courage to try anyway. She caught Roland on the front steps and she asked him, please, to reconsider. She told him how Duke had laid his head in her son's lap, how the dog had grieved the colonel like a person, how gentle he'd become. Roland looked at her the way you'd look at a fly on your soup. "You're the maid with the child," he said. "You, of all people, should want that beast gone. What happens to your boy when the dog turns? And it will turn, they always do." He pulled on his gloves. "Saturday, it's decided. Keep your son inside when the county man comes. I won't have a screaming child in the yard." And he walked back into the house and shut the door. 2 days passed like a held breath. The whole staff knew now. You could feel it hanging over the estate, that black cloud. Even the dog seemed to know something was wrong. He stayed closer to the boy than ever, and at night he lay across the bottom of the porch steps, ears up, watching the dark drive as if he could feel the rifle coming up it. Saturday came hot and bright, and around noon, a battered county truck rattled up the long drive and stopped in the yard. A heavy-set man climbed out with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a coil of rope in his hand. Roland came down off the porch to meet him, ledger under his arm, all business. They shook hands. They talked low. And then they both turned and looked across the lawn to the old oak tree, where a scarred German shepherd lay in the shade with his head up, watching them. "That him?" the county man asked. "That's him," Roland said. "Bitten 2 men. I want it done clean, and I want it done now." Clara had Thomas inside. She'd been told to keep him there, and she'd meant to. She had him on her hip in the kitchen, the window cracked, her heart hammering. She watched the man lift the rifle off his shoulder and start across the grass, slow and easy, the rope ready in his other hand. Duke rose to his feet under the tree. His hackles came up. That old rumble started in his chest. He knew. Some way he knew what that long metal thing was, and he backed against the trunk of the oak with his teeth bared, the soldier again, ready to sell himself dear. The county man stopped 20 feet off and brought the rifle up to his shoulder. And that was the exact moment Thomas twisted out of his mother's arms. He was 2. He'd heard the truck. He wanted his dog. He slid down Clara's hip, hit the floor running, and shot out the kitchen door into the yard before her hands could close on air. "Thomas!" she screamed. And now she did scream, because there was no careful step slow enough for this. Her boy was running full tilt across the open lawn, straight between the man with the rifle and the dog at the tree, right into the line of fire. The county man saw the child come into his sights and jerked the barrel up toward the sky, cursing. Roland shouted something. Clara was off the porch and running, but she was 30 feet back and her boy was almost to the tree. And then the grass moved. Right there in the boy's path, coiled in the shade at the base of the oak, A thick brown snake lifted its head. A cottonmouth big around as a man's wrist, jaw open white as cotton, mad as sin at all the noise and the pounding feet coming its way. Thomas, eyes only on his dog, ran straight at it and never saw it at all. The snake drew back to strike. What happened next happened faster than I can tell it. Duke came off that oak tree like something shot out of a cannon. 3 years of stiff old bones, and he crossed that ground in a gray blur. He hit the space between the boy and the snake at a dead run, and he took that strike meant for the child on his own body. The cottonmouth's fangs sank deep into his shoulder, right into the old scars, and Duke didn't so much as slow down. He whipped his head, caught the snake behind its jaws, and shook it once hard, the way his old master had trained him to do a lifetime ago. Then he flung it away broken into the weeds, and he spun and put his own body square in front of the boy, facing out, guarding him from every danger in the world at once. The rifle, the stranger, the snake, all of it, and only then did he stagger. The venom was already burning up his leg. His shoulder was swelling, the 2 dark holes weeping where the fangs had gone in. He swayed on his feet, but he didn't leave that spot in front of the boy, not for anything. The whole yard had gone dead silent. The county man stood with his rifle pointed at the sky and his mouth hanging open. Roland Ashford had dropped his ledger in the grass and didn't even know it. Every soul on that estate had just watched a dog they'd sentenced to die throw his own body onto a snake to save a maid's child. Clara reached them and snatched Thomas up off the ground, running her hands all over him, sobbing, checking every inch. Not a mark on him, not a scratch. The dog had taken every bit of it. Duke's legs finally gave out. He sank down into the grass at Clara's feet, breathing hard and shallow, and he turned his head and looked up at the boy in her arms, just to be sure. Just to know the child was safe. And when he saw that he was, the old dog let out a long breath and laid his head down in the dirt. Roland Ashford walked slowly across the lawn and stood over the fallen dog, and his cold, ledger-keeping face had cracked clean in 2. "My God," he said quietly. He never even hesitated. The county man lowered his rifle all the way and shook his head. "Mister, I've been doing this work 20 years. I never once saw a dog do that. That right there is no vicious animal. That's the finest dog I ever laid eyes on." Roland knelt down in the grass in his fine gray suit, right in the dirt, and he looked at the 2 dark punctures swelling in the dog's shoulder. Then he looked up, and his voice was different now. Not flat, not cold, just a man. "Is there a vet in town, a horse doctor, anyone?" He was already pulling off his jacket to slide under the dog's head. Get him now. I'll pay whatever it costs. Just get somebody out here who can save this dog." They saved him, barely. The horse doctor came at a gallop and worked over Duke on the kitchen table half the night. He cut the wound. He drew what venom he could. He sat with him through the worst of it, when Duke's breathing went so shallow that Clara, holding the lamp, was sure they'd lost him. Cottonmouth venom is a hard thing for any creature to survive, and Duke was not young, and he'd taken a full strike. But that old soldier had one more fight left in him. Somewhere in the small dark hours, his breathing steadied. The swelling stopped climbing, and near dawn he opened his eyes, and the first thing he did was lift his head and look around the room for the boy. Thomas was asleep in a chair, curled up under Clara's shawl. And when Duke saw him there, safe, whole, breathing soft, the dog put his head back down and slept himself. And this time it was a real sleep, deep and easy, the sleep of a creature who'd finally done the one thing he'd been waiting years to do. He was slow to heal. The shoulder gave him a limp that never fully went away, so that for the rest of his days he walked with a hitch in his step, the same way the old colonel used to walk with his cane. Clara noticed that once, and it brought tears to her eyes. Like a little piece of the old master had come back to live in the dog. Roland Ashford stayed on at the estate longer than anyone expected. and he was not the same man who'd stepped out of that motor car. He came out to the yard every morning to check on the dog's healing. He had a proper bed built for Duke and set it on the back porch in the shade. And one evening, he sat down on the step beside Clara, awkward, a rich man who'd forgotten how to talk to people like they were people. "My uncle wrote about that dog in his letters," he said. "Everyone. I never paid much mind. I thought a dog was a dog." He was quiet a while. "I was going to shoot him because of a number in a ledger, and he'd have died to save your boy either way. He didn't know I'd ordered it. He didn't care. He just saw the child in danger and he went." He shook his head slowly. "I've spent my whole life keeping accounts. I don't think I ever once did a thing that's simple and that good." He tore 2 pages out of his leather ledger that night. The 2 injury claims. He tore them right out and dropped them in the kitchen stove and watched them burn. Duke lived for more years. Good years. He never bit another soul, and he never had to, because everyone on the estate came to understand what he was. Not a monster. Just a heart that had loved one man so hard it broke when that man died, and then found a small pair of hands willing to put it back together. He and Thomas were never apart. The dog walked the boy to the edge of the property and back. He lay under the oak while Thomas played, one eye open, guarding. When Thomas learned to run, the dog ran beside him, limp and all. When Thomas skinned his knee, it was the dog he cried into. That old shepherd raised that boy near about as much as Clara did, and every hand on the estate came to say the same thing. That child had the finest bodyguard in the state of Georgia, and it walked on 4 legs. Clara kept her job, and more than that, she kept her peace. The rope of fear that had been tied so tight around her heart eased at last, because she knew, waking or sleeping, wherever her boy was, that dog was 2 steps behind him, watching the world for anything that might do him harm. When Duke finally went, he went old and gray and easy on the back porch in the sun, with the boy, bigger now, sitting beside him and one small hand resting in his fur, the same as that first day under the tree. He just closed his eyes and let go, and he wasn't alone, and he wasn't afraid, and he wasn't behind any wall. They buried him up under the oak, near a stone that already stood there. The Colonel's stone. The old master and his dog back together at last under the same tree, guarding the same quiet patch of ground. Roland had a small brass tag made and set it in the earth beside the grave. It didn't say vicious. It didn't say dangerous. It said the only thing that had ever been true: good dog. And every summer after, when the heat came down thick over Savannah and the cicadas started up in the trees, a young boy would go and sit under that oak by the 2 graves and pat the warm grass and remember the day a mean old dog everyone was afraid of chose to lay his broken heart in a stranger's lap, and how that same heart, once it opened, never once closed again. Not for anything. Not even death. Some things you shut out of your heart to keep from getting hurt. And some small, stubborn thing comes along anyway and reaches right through the teeth and reminds you what the heart was for in the first place. Duke learned that under a tree, one humid afternoon, from a 2-year-old who only saw a lonely dog who needed a friend. And that, believe me, made all the difference.